Continuing on with preaching Jesus, but this time instead of just focusing on the glory of how Jesus spoke this message of salvation, we're going to focus on how the message gets twisted and perverted. For there's one God, and there's one salvation, there's one message, and there's one gospel. And it's not many gospels. It's not a twisted gospel. You can't mess with this message. This message belongs to God. And Jesus is a clear historical figure. You can't make Jesus to be what you want him to be. I am telling you, Jesus has passion. Jesus is not just this God in the sky, Santa Claus type figure that, has winks at sin. He can't. Jesus can't wink at sin because he had to die. How could a person who died, who came all the way from heaven through time and eternity and came to a people and went through the struggle of humanity, who made himself poor and weak when he was God, just for the purpose of dealing with sin and to once and for all put it away so that man and God could have a relationship again? And when the Pharisees saw Jesus, he was the one and only true thing, but they missed it. And I'm telling you, people are missing it today. I have been preaching for 3 years. People know about my ministry, yet they twist what I say. They don't come and ask me directly, what do you believe? They don't test me. They don't verify if I'm for God or not. They judge from a distance. They look at it with their religious eyes, or out of fear or competition, or all the other silly reasons that people come up with. But it's just garbage. And in Jesus' day, in Mark chapter 3, it says in verse 1, and Jesus entered the synagogue again, and a man there who had a withered hand. What do you do with your hand? Well, you grab things, you hold things, you take a drink, you hold someone's hand, you reach out and you put on a coat with your hand, you shake hands, you stroke somebody on the head, a child, or you touch a person's shoulder with your hand. And this man's hand was withered. It didn't work. Do you have any idea? I've never had a withered hand, but I can't imagine what it was like to be this man in the synagogue, a religious, faithful religious man, someone who came to synagogue, who listened to Moses' law, who was trying to do what God showed him to do from his word. And we assume that he had faith. And it says that they watched Jesus. Who? Who did that? The Pharisees. And you think Jesus is not going to take them at their game? Whether that he would heal this man with this withered, shrunken down hand. On what day? The Sabbath. Do you know that Jesus is the Sabbath? That Jesus is the rest of God? Why is he the rest of God for those who believe? These people in the synagogue had to work hard to do what Jesus said, to do the law of God, to do truth. They had to work hard at truth. It was much more difficult than our showing up at church at 10 o'clock or 11 o'clock on Sunday, hanging out for an hour, putting up with whatever. Maybe you like it. I'm not judging that. But it was much more demanding than modern day American evangelicalism. Not every Sunday. We try our best. Some are more faithful than others. But this man with the withered hand, let's assume that he was a faithful Jew. Yet, no matter how faithful he was, his hand was still withered. He could not stroke his child if he had one on the head with that hand. He could not comfort his wife with that hand. That hand did not work. Yet the Pharisees, what do? They want to see if Jesus is going to heal this guy who has a very real problem, who has a very real affliction. Maybe he was born with it. And they're more concerned about how Jesus was going to do something than what he did. And you know, I've had to deal with that. It is not a nice thing for you to judge a person on how he does something. From a distance. Never talk to his face. Isn't that cowardly? At least these scribes are questioning Jesus. At least these scribes are doing the manly thing. They're coming up to your face. But when people go around behind your back and twist everything up, that's satanic. That's demonic. And that, I've had to deal with that. And I want to show you what Jesus' response is. And then I'm going to turn to Galatians chapter 1. And I'm going to carry forward the same attitude that Jesus had toward these Pharisees that Paul had to the Judaizers. And you're probably going to sense that my countenance is a little ruffled, because God's countenance is a little ruffled toward people who twist the gospel message of hope. The only way of salvation. They twist it and make it a little better, but when they do that, they ruin it forever. They ruin their own soul and everybody who has to sit there and listen to them. And these crazy Pharisees had a band of followers, a bunch of sycophants, that followed them around to validate their position. I wish they would just all alone, like the Jesus people end up being many times. The ones with a following are the ones you should be worried about. With a massive following. A bunch of people who don't think for themselves, but they just follow because they're just looking for something. And the Pharisees had an entourage. And this entourage was sitting around in the synagogue on the Sabbath day, watching Jesus to catch him in what he was going to do. Was he going to heal a man with a withered hand or not? That was the question. And he said to the man who had a withered hand, Jesus, step forward. Then he said to them, is it lawful on the Sabbath to do good? So he didn't just do it. He knew the Pharisees were there, and he asked a simple question. Is it lawful to do good on the Sabbath? If you've been a Sabbatarian, I was raised in a Sabbatarian environment. Sabbatarian are people that on Sunday believe that you shut down all work, unless you're a doctor, fireman, or whatever, and even you should avoid those jobs because you won't be able to keep the Sabbath. So these Sabbatarians, these religious Jewish Sabbatarians, he asked them a question, is it lawful in Moses, not in yourself, but in Moses, to do something good? Like if someone's ox ends up in a ditch, is it a good thing to lift it out of the ditch? Or if someone needs some food, or their food spoiled, or someone needs someone to help find something for them, or whatever, something good, something helpful to your neighbor, which is predicated in the 6 commandments, starting with honor your father and mother, is the law of loving your neighbor as yourself. And Jesus says, is it lawful to do good or to do evil? Good or evil? Question, good or evil? And I'm telling you, is it lawful for Jonathan Keener to preach the gospel with a t-shirt on and with long hair? Is it, if I'm preaching the gospel and people are getting touched and they're feeling Jesus and they're saying the presence of God is heavy in this place, and they feel God and they believe that I'm a messenger sent from God, is it lawful for me to do that if people's lives are impacted? Or is it bad because you don't like the way I look? That's the question I'm going to ask today. Those of you who are twisting the gospel into something that it isn't. And God is just as annoyed, you're going to see here. It says, to save a life or to kill a life? That's the question. Can you just understand the simplicity of this question? And then maybe you'll see how dumb you're acting. He says, and when they looked around at them, he looked around, Jesus did, and he did it with anger. It says right here, with anger, being grieved by the hardness of their heart. How can your heart be so hard and so cold to sinners? You're not going to preach to these kids who wear these, this weird hair, multicolored, tight jeans, they're tattooed all over the place, piercings everywhere. You're not going to preach to them. You're going to talk about what they look like first. You're not going to preach Jesus to them.